America is facing a tense July 9th, with several stories moving at once. The ceasefire with Iran is collapsing after new strikes around the Strait of Hormuz, and markets are already reacting through oil, stocks, and inflation fears. Trump has opened a new fight inside NATO by ordering preparations to cut off trade with Spain. The White House is also moving to remove Syria from the U.S. state sponsor of terrorism list, a decision that now goes to Congress for review. Ukraine is getting a major Patriot missile production opening from Washington. At home, the Federal Reserve is split over inflation. The Supreme Court has allowed a Texas age verification law for app stores to move forward, and Memphis is facing new questions after another deadly confrontation involving Trump's federal anti-crime task force. The ceasefire track with Iran is falling apart. President Trump said the arrangement with Tehran was over after Iranian attacks on commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz triggered new U.S. strikes. American officials described the strikes as retaliation, while Iran responded with attacks against U.S.-linked positions in the Gulf. The danger now is not limited to military escalation. It also goes straight into the American economy. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important energy routes. If tankers slow down, insurers raise rates, or shipping companies reroute vessels, oil prices can move quickly. That is already showing up in markets. Crude prices jumped, stocks fell, and investors moved away from risk as the possibility of a longer confrontation returned. For American households, the chain is simple. Higher oil prices can push up gasoline, freight costs, and eventually grocery prices. That creates a new headache for the Federal Reserve because inflation is already above target. Trump is trying to present the strikes as a controlled response, not a full return to war. But once the ceasefire language breaks down, every attack creates pressure for the next response. The political risk is also high. Voters are already focused on the cost of living. A new energy shock could make foreign policy feel like a domestic problem almost immediately. Trump's confrontation with Spain has turned the NATO summit into a trade and alliance crisis. The president ordered his Treasury Secretary to prepare a halt to U.S. trade with Spain after accusing Madrid of failing to meet NATO's higher defense spending expectations and refusing to fully support U.S. operations connected to Iran. Spain is not only a NATO member, it is also part of the European Union, which means trade policy is normally handled through Brussels, not only through Madrid. That makes the threat legally and diplomatically complicated. But the message from Washington is clear. Trump wants allies to believe that defense spending disputes can now carry economic consequences. Spanish officials have tried to downplay the confrontation and point to their security commitments, including deployments in Europe and the importance of U.S. military bases in Spain. Markets still reacted to the threat because even preparation for an embargo can disturb investment and business planning. The danger for NATO is bigger than one argument with one ally. If the United States starts using trade threats against members of its own alliance, other governments will ask whether security commitments are becoming conditional. For Trump, the move fits his broader strategy. He wants to force allies to pay more and show American voters that he is not giving Europe a free ride. But the same tactic can also split the alliance at the exact moment when Washington needs unity over Iran, Ukraine, and Russia. The White House is moving to remove Syria from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Trump has formally notified Congress, which now has a 45-day review period before the change can become final. The administration argues that the move would remove major barriers to Syria's reconstruction and open the door for American investment. It follows earlier steps to ease sanctions after the fall of the Assad government and the rise of President Ahmed al-Sharaa. Supporters of the move say Syria needs financial oxygen if it is going to rebuild and keep extremist groups from returning. They also argue that Gulf states are ready to invest, but U.S. restrictions make recovery harder. Critics see a serious risk. Syria's new leadership has a complicated past, and removing the terrorism designation would lift restrictions on aid, defense exports, and financial transactions. Congress now has to decide whether the potential benefits are worth the security risk. For the United States, this is also about influence. If Washington stays locked out while regional powers fund Syria's rebuilding, America loses leverage. If it moves too fast, it could face backlash from lawmakers who do not trust the new government in Damascus. The decision is one of the biggest shifts in U.S. Syria policy in years. Ukraine is getting a major signal of support from Washington. Trump said the United States will give Ukraine a license to build Patriot air defense systems. The announcement came during a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the NATO summit. For Kyiv, this matters because air defense remains one of the most urgent needs in the war against Russia. Patriot systems are used to intercept missiles and protect cities, energy infrastructure, and military targets. A production license could help Ukraine reduce dependence on slow foreign deliveries, although building complex air defense systems takes time, money, and technical support. The political meaning is just as important. Trump has often pressured allies to carry more of the burden, But this move shows that Washington still wants to shape Ukraine's defense architecture. It also sends a message to Moscow that American support is not disappearing. The practical challenge is industrial capacity. The United States and its allies are already trying to produce more interceptors and air defense equipment while also watching stockpiles after the Iran conflict. Ukraine may get a stronger long-term path, but it still needs protection now. That gap between long-term production and immediate battlefield demand will remain one of the hardest problems for NATO. The Federal Reserve is openly divided over the next direction of interest rates. Minutes from the June meeting showed that officials are split over whether inflation will cool or remain stubborn. 9 of the 18 policymakers expected rates to be slightly higher by the end of 2026, while others saw room to hold steady or eventually move lower. The Fed kept its benchmark rate in the 3.50 to 3.75% range at that meeting. The debate is about where the biggest danger sits. Some officials worry that oil, tariffs, AI-driven demand for electricity, and expensive technology components will keep inflation elevated. Others believe price pressure could ease if energy costs stabilize and the labor market continues to slow. For households, the difference matters. Higher rates mean more expensive mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and small business borrowing. Lower rates could help growth, but if they come too soon, inflation could become harder to control. The next consumer price report is now even more important. If Iran tensions push fuel prices higher, the Fed may have less room to soften its stance. This is why foreign policy and household budgets are now linked. A confrontation in the Gulf can affect the price of gasoline in America and then influence the next Fed decision in Washington. The fight over children and technology is moving deeper into the courts. The Supreme Court declined to block a Texas law that requires app stores and developers to verify users' ages and obtain parental consent for minors. The law can now be enforced while the legal challenge continues. Texas argues that the measure protects children from harmful content, privacy risks, and data exploitation. Technology groups and student plaintiffs say it creates a broad restriction on speech and access to information. Their concern is that age checks could become a gate in front of news, education, communication, and political content. This case is part of a wider national conflict. States are trying to regulate children's online lives faster than Congress can pass a federal standard. Courts are being asked to decide where child protection ends and censorship begins. The same pressure is visible in the case against Meta. 4 states are seeking massive penalties over claims that Facebook and Instagram were designed to addict young users and that the company misled the public about safety. Meta denies the allegations and says the penalty demand is not supported by the evidence. The outcome of these fights could shape how every major platform designs accounts, age checks, parental controls, and data practices for children. Memphis is facing new scrutiny after another deadly confrontation involving the federal anti-crime task force backed by Trump. AP reported that a second person in 4 days was fatally shot by a member of the Memphis Safe Task Force. The latest shooting involved a DEA operation at a hotel where officials said a suspect pointed a gun at task force members. The task force includes federal agents, local police, and Tennessee National Guard personnel. It was created as part of Trump's campaign to crack down on violent crime in Democratic-led cities. Supporters say the operation brings needed federal pressure to a city with serious public safety problems. Critics argue that mixing federal agents, local police, and military personnel in street-level enforcement can create new dangers. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation is reviewing multiple shootings connected to the task force. Families and activists are demanding transparency, including video and clearer explanations of what happened in each case. For the White House, this is politically sensitive. Trump wants these operations to show strength and order, but each deadly incident gives opponents a chance to argue that the strategy is too aggressive and too difficult to control. The facts of the latest case are still under investigation, but the broader debate is already moving beyond Memphis. The United States is entering the middle of July with pressure coming from several directions. The Iran ceasefire is breaking down and oil markets are reacting. A NATO summit has turned into a dispute over Spain, trade and alliance discipline. Syria policy is moving into a major new phase. Ukraine is being offered a longer-term Patriot production path. At home, the Federal Reserve is split over inflation. Courts are reshaping the rules for children online, and Memphis is testing the politics of Trump's federal crime strategy. The next few days will show whether Washington can control these crises or whether they begin to feed into one larger summer conflict over prices, security, and presidential power.